I want to introduce the panelists, and there are also a few special guests in the audience. To begin with, we have Dr. Michael Geist, who's a law professor at the University of Ottawa. Many of you have known him or heard him or read his stuff. He's got a wonderful blog, and he has got some amazing editorials and articles. He's a syndicated columnist in The Citizen and also in the Toronto Star, actually, BBC as well. He's written a lot of articles and government reports on the internet and law, and he was a member of Canada's National Task Force on Spam. Dr. Geist is the editor of The Public Interest, The Future of Canadian Copyright Law, published in 2005, the editor of several monthly technology law publications, and the author of a popular blog on the internet, which many of you often go to, I'm sure, and intellectual property law issues. And as I've often heard said at some of these meetings, Dr. Geist never sleeps. Our second speaker will be Charlie Angus. He couldn't sleep from producing that much stuff. Charlie Angus was elected member of Parliament for Timmins James Bay in 2004 and re-elected in 2006. He has worked as a writer, broadcaster, and musician. He's a member of the Juno-nominated band Grievous Angels. I didn't play Juno.
I didn't ask you to bring a guitar.
Charlie has been honored for outstanding contributions to Northern culture at the 1999 Festival Boreal in Sudbury, and he's been a regular contributor to CBC, TVO, and national newspapers. And as you just heard, he's also introduced a private members bill on these topics. Rocky Goudreau, our third speaker, is the CEO of Tech Savvy Solutions Incorporated, based in Chatham, Ontario. So you've come from Chatham, right? Rocky has... No?
Very long walk.
Oh, long walk. Rocky has achieved a considerable reputation for his stance on the importance of the open internet and for taking on the biggest telecom characters in the country on telecom policy issues, and that takes quite a bit of nerve. In May 2008, Rocky even went so far as to bus most of his employees to Parliament Hill to rally for net neutrality. I think some of you people were probably there at that rally too, right? We also have a few special guests in the audience. I can find my paper here. And I invite them to speak up whenever a topic comes up that they want to intervene in, or I may recognize you at some point. We have Jacob Glick, the Canada Policy Council of Google Canada. Is he here? I'm here. Okay. We have Mike Gifford, founder of Open Concept Consulting. We have Leslie Regan-Shade, Communications Professor at Concordia University. Graham Cox, Canadian Federation of Students. And David Fewer, Canadian Internet Policy and Public Interest Clinic. David. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to invite Dr. Geist to come up to the podium and...
Can you hear in the back? All right. Sort of? Talk louder? Okay. I'm going to talk, and hopefully people can hear. So I want to thank the organizers behind Save Our Net for organizing this and for the invitation. It's a great opportunity to come and speak. And I'm thankful to all of you as well for coming out. I think the fact that there's this many people coming out on a Wednesday night to spend a couple of hours talking about net neutrality says a lot about how far this issue has come and how I think it's going to really emerge large on the political scene in the months ahead. So I appeared before a Senate committee a couple of weeks ago, the Senate Transport and Communications Committee, and they gave me like 90 minutes. They gave me a long time. It was actually a fun appearance, and I spoke about sort of three issues that I thought were interconnected. I still think they're interconnected: broadband access, the state of wireless in Canada, and net neutrality. And we had the chance to get into what has been the declining ranking in Canada with respect to broadband, the concerns around the lack of access still for too many Canadians, the lack of competition associated with the wireless industry, and then the issue of net neutrality, which sits nicely there both from a wireless and a wired perspective. And the senators are just getting up to speed, or these senators were just getting up to speed on this issue, though I think their instincts on this are right on. They actually had traveled to Europe the week before that I appeared to get a sense and a comparison between Canada and I think it was France and Britain on the state of their internet infrastructure. And I think they had already come back in some ways convinced that we have a lot of work to do here in Canada. But the one thing that struck me about the kinds of questions that I got asked on a pretty repeated basis from the senators was, in a sense, they asked the same question that apparently appears as the very last question on this handout, which is, what do we do? So I think that they appreciated that there are problems in this area, and their concern was, well, what can we do? And I think, in fact, whether by design or inadvertently, we've got a panel that's dedicated or going to focus on what we can do. So Charlie, I'm sure, will talk a bit about his private members bill, which is one thing that we could do, and Rocky can talk a bit about his fight at the CRTC, which is, of course, another thing that we can do, or that can be done. And I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about a couple of other things that I think can be done. And my focus here is actually to, and I mentioned it I think on the CBC this afternoon, to focus on what I think of as the low-hanging fruit. So there are issues that are unquestionably controversial and difficult to deal with. And I don't know that anybody has the exact answer about how to deal with them, much less how to put it into legislation to make it to deal with all the kinds of concerns that come up. But I think that there are, within this broader rubric of net neutrality, a number of points of which just about everybody across the spectrum ought to be able to agree on, and that we ought to ensure is enshrined either today in law, or if it isn't, will be enshrined into law. Now, as a starting point, the first, of course, would be no content blocking at all. Now, of course, our friends over in the telecom companies will tell us, well, the law already says that. But we know that there is at least one high-profile incident, and they hate when we bring it up, in which TELUS blocked access to one site in particular, but in the process blocked access to about 600 websites. And they did it for just a couple of days until they were able to obtain a court order in which they ordered the one website that they had a particular problem with, it was during a strike action, to remove certain amounts of content. And so they say it was one time, we've never done it again, we never would do it again, and the argument is that the law applies. Well, I was in Banff on the weekend, in which I engaged in a TELUS-sponsored debate with TELUS. And this issue came up, and one of the responses from a TELUS executive was that they described their blocking as incompetent, because they blocked these hundreds of other sites. So I said, okay, so you're incompetent and you blocked these sites. And my question for TELUS, for which I never got an answer, and for which I never recall hearing an answer from them at all, was, if in fact it's their position that Canadian law addresses this issue, do they acknowledge that they broke the law? And I have never heard TELUS say definitively that yes, we violated Canadian law when we did it. And from my perspective, that either the law addresses this issue, in which case they broke the law and are apparently incompetent, or Canadian law doesn't address the issue, in which case they didn't violate the law, and we've got a clear problem with respect to Canadian law and the way in which it's enforced. And so surely we ought to be able to agree that content ought not to be blocked, and we've got one incident that I think we still today, years later, need clarification on as to whether or not this was a violation of the law or not. And I think we've TELUS to step up and discuss.